Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Pinzone. I am a student at the Ball State University in course SPCE 683 section 812, and this is my presentation and staff training on conflict resolution and its plan. So the overview for this presentation is that in this training, we will learn how to identify common conflicts found in a clinical ABA setting, and you will also learn the skills on how to overcome some of these challenges and the steps you can take to help reduce the conflict from occurring in the future. So just some objectives. The first objective is understand and identify some common conflicts observed in a clinical setting. The second objective is understand how to define the conflict and identify some common strategies to help mitigate them. And our final objective is to identify some preventative measures and how they can help reduce the conflict from occurring in the future. So just to begin, I always think it's important, especially when talking about conflicts, to go over the BACB ethical guidelines. I've provided the resource of the entire BACB ethical guideline, but I think it's also important to identify that they do have an 11-step process on how to handle ethical conflicts. And while not every conflict will necessarily be a very hard set like BACB ethical guidelines conflict, I do think that this is a great resource and helps outline some of the steps that you can take when dealing with any conflict, and also making sure that you're maintaining or remaining within your ethical guidelines. I also think it is extremely important to remain competent on your current ethical guidelines and how they apply to your current situation, regardless of having a conflict or not. Maintaining competency within the ethical guidelines is going to be essential and crucial for delivering services, but even more so when dealing with conflicts. So I think just understanding the 11 steps and seeing how they apply and using them within conflict resolution is extremely important. So I would definitely take the time to review the ethical guidelines and kind of just go from there. So another resource that I would like to provide before jumping in is also this flowchart. Within the flowchart, which is provided to you guys as well, lists kind of the steps that you can take when dealing with the conflict. So the first step would be define the conflict. So kind of creating that operational definition of like what the conflict looks like. While we are going to be talking about 3 specific ones, I think it's still important to kind of just have this, even though it might not be the specific 3, to use with future conflicts that are not listed within this presentation. So the plan currently is define conflict, leadership plan, action plan, a monitoring stage, and just follow up to make sure that we are preventing conflicts. So the first conflict that we will go over is misunderstanding with families. So this will look like as during collaboration meetings, the families and BCBAs misunderstand the goals being worked on and interventions being used. There's also a misunderstanding on what interventions are best suited for the client, which leads to disagreement on treatment goals. So this might be parents wanting punishment procedures as the first step versus the BCBA might wanting to use positive reinforcement to reduce maladaptive behaviors and things like that. So I kind of want to take this time to discuss and brainstorm some strategies just off of the top of your head that you might think of on how to overcome this conflict before moving on to the next slide. So some strategies to help reduce this conflict is using active listening skills when families are explaining their goals for their children and or concerns for the interventions that you have in place. I also think summarize what was said back to families to make sure that you understood correctly and that families also understand correctly. This way, you can begin the collaboration process with a clear understanding of what families want to work on and kind of help reduce any conflict in the future. And also provide information on different methods. So that might be providing the information on the intervention in a written way, maybe drawing things out for families, kind of different ways of presenting material, just to make sure that they fully understand. And some preventative measures are to obtain additional training on cultural humility or clients' cultural backgrounds. This also helps understand communication styles of families and gain a deeper understanding of how culture impacts those conversations that you might have with families in the future. So the second conflict is staff disagreements. So this will be like when an RBT disagrees with the BCBA on a specific intervention with the client and is not running that intervention during sessions. So I also want to take some time to kind of brainstorm and discuss as a group what some strategies we can think of to help overcome this conflict. So, some strategies that we can use to help mitigate this conflict is meet with the RBT and communicate why this intervention is important to the client's behaviors. Sometimes RBTs might not necessarily understand why an intervention is effective, so I think understanding kind of helps bring education awareness to what it is that we're trying to do with these interventions. And this also goes hand in hand with explaining the research and evidence behind this intervention. Also, allow the RBT to explain why they don't agree with the intervention. Sometimes this is also a great brainstorming opportunity of how to kind of collaborate together and figure out the next steps. Use active listening skills and remain positive when the RBT is explaining their disagreement with the intervention. And finally, adjust the intervention if needed and provide support on implementation if needed as well. To obtain feedback at the end of each supervision and use the last 10 minutes of supervision to debrief any changes that were made to interventions and explain why these interventions were made. And I think this is also a great opportunity to provide the RBT or supervisee the opportunity to ask questions and address any concerns beforehand, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so finally, our third conflict is issues with client progress. So this will look like a client's interventions are inconsistently being used in the clinic and are not properly implemented by their RBTs. And the client's data is inconsistent and little progress is being made towards overall behavior reduction goals. So graphs are looking a little wonky. Maladaptive behaviors aren't necessarily decreasing. They might be increasing or varied throughout the session. So what are some strategies as a group that we can think of to help overcome this conflict? So some strategies that we can use are to increase supervision with the RBTs and provide additional support and training using a BST model. This also helps just us to see and observe maybe what additional resources might be needed to just make sure that that client's progress is being um, maintained. Also, create an opportunity to answer questions and provide clarity on the use of the intervention and its application. So, that might be debriefing within the first or last 10 minutes of supervision or the session, or it might just be meeting with the RBT. And provide feedback to the RBT and their preferred communication style. Some preventative measures is to provide a task list on how interventions should be implemented and in a readily available spot for the RBTs to reference. And also ask the RBT what the preferred learning style is and use that learning style throughout supervision when using a BST approach. So, in conclusion, conflicts in a clinical setting could be extremely difficult to navigate, and there are some common conflicts that can be seen within a clinical setting that you can be prepared for. Understanding the BACB's ethical guidelines can help reduce stress in these situations and help guide your steps when kind of mitigating these conflicts. And each conflict comes with its own set of challenges, but by following the flowchart and the resources provided, you can be better prepared to handle these situations in the real world setting and other conflicts that might not have been listed in this presentation.